honored to host T.M. Garret as part of Stand With Us here at Sinai Temple. I've shared the stage with many rabbis and intellectuals and scholars, but I have to say, I have never shared the stage with a former neo-Nazi who, as we'll find at the end of the evening, is about to be part of the Jewish people very soon. T.M. Garret. So we're going to have a conversation, then we're going to have a chance to have a Q&A as well with our members of our community speaking with TM. But I want to begin with the Jewish or biblical concept first, and that's lo tishkach. Lo tishkach means never forget. We see that in the story of Amalek, the tribe that attacked the Israelite people from behind. And for us as Jews, often we say lo tishkach in terms of never forget the Holocaust, never forget Nazism, never forget Haman, all of the evil that followed the Jews. But as you, who was a self-declared neo-Nazi, head of the KKK in Germany, what do these words mean, never forget, in terms of your history and today?
First of all, okay, just want to try if the microphone works. That is a hard question. Never forget. At the time when I was a hater, we of course twisted it. And it was never forget where we come from. And when we heard it from the other side, and technically everybody else was on the other side, we felt we were the good ones and everybody else was evil. We felt we were on a good mission. So when we heard it on the media or from everybody else technically, we thought it's a lie, never again. Because in my worst times, I was a Holocaust denier. And therefore, there was no never again. Because I believed it didn't happen.
And when you were faced with the facts that it perhaps did happen, how in your mind you deny that, or is it just in that circle of people?
Well, I didn't grow up like that. So I didn't grow up in an environment that was very anti-Semitic, maybe subtle anti-Semitic. You have to realize I was born in 1975, 30 years after the liberation of Auschwitz. And of course in school we learned about the Holocaust, about what the Nazis did. And we learned the Nazis were the bad guys, like in 1985, 45 years after the liberation of Auschwitz. And there was subtle anti-Semitism in Germany, and I call it unintentional anti-Semitism that's maybe a leftover from Hitler Germany. Like, I remember there was a little store that had pretty much everything you could think of. And my father and the grandmother, they called it, let's go to Abraham Yud. Because where they were from, today's Czech Republic, they had a high Jewish population, and little stores like that were often Jewish. So, and I never asked them if they're anti-Semites. It never crossed my mind when I was 10. But then when we learned about the Holocaust, and again, it's 45 years after the liberation of Auschwitz only, and my grandmother was still alive, my great-grandmother was still alive, and many male grandparents of my friends were still alive. These are people I loved, or they loved. And then you learn what the Nazis did and atrocities. And you have to ask yourself the question, the people I love maybe have been involved in some of these atrocities. And you don't know what to do with this feeling as a 13-year-old in puberty. And you shove it away. You look for some other way out. And that's what I did.
And so, as you said, I don't know what to do with that idea, but then you, in fact, take it further. And so, in just a moment, we're going to look at the screen as a clip of TM's explanation of how he entered hate. So if we can play that clip.
I was bullied a lot. I spent a lot of time playing alone. And at some point, I found something that would make people listen. That's that attention that what I was craving for. And it started with a couple of kids that were telling each other racist jokes, inappropriate jokes about anybody. There was no respect. But I actually realized that it gives me the attention that I wanted. So I kept running with those jokes. And after that, it was just known I was the Nazi kid at school, which I hated. I didn't like the label. But all of a sudden, I wasn't bullied anymore. and it felt like all of a sudden I am somebody. I'm not a nobody anymore. And then a kid gave me a cassette tape at school, and it was rock music, hard rock music, and they sang about things that sounded very, very familiar to me. They sang about that they felt misunderstood, that people would call them Nazis, but they're not, and that they're just proud of their country. And I felt like they're singing about me. And with every cassette tape I got, it just got worse. First it was a little bit more unpolitical, and then it got harder and more hateful, and that influenced me. And the more hateful the music got, the more hateful I became.
And so what is that entry into hate? When did you realize that you were the definition of that word?
Actually, when I received these cassette tapes, I was just playing with the thought and provocation and getting that attention that I craved. And then I wanted to get to know these people, these skinheads. And I found them, and I joined a group of skinheads. There was still little ideology involved. It was about concerts and drinking and picking some street fights with Turkish street gangs. That changed. I was about 15. 2 years later, 17, I just went to college. I was recruited by a neo-Nazi party. And first I didn't want to go there, but somebody talked me into it. And they had a simple solution for that feeling that I described a couple of minutes ago with my grandparents. That dilemma that I felt I was in. Because I still didn't really feel like a Nazi for a long time. When I was telling these jokes, I thought the Nazis died in Nuremberg in 1946. Because I didn't know anything about neo-Nazis or skinheads for a long time until I got these cassette tapes. So this neo-Nazi party, they were Holocaust deniers. Which means they claimed it never happened. If it never happened, there's no way that my grandparents could have been involved. They also claimed that Germany didn't start World War II, but that they defended themselves. Oh wow, all of a sudden my grandparents could be heroes. That sounded much, much better. So I ran with it too, and it was politicized. And of course ideology kicked in, Germany first, and all the enemies were introduced. Black people, communists, the Jews. But at the beginning, it was all on the same level. All the enemies were in one pot. There was not one main enemy that was responsible for all this. It was just general at the beginning.
And so there's ideology, but then there's action. What actions did you take that showed that hate to other people, either emotionally or even physical?
Physically, it was with the skinheads, again, but it was little ideology. It was a lot of street gang mentality at the time. But when the ideology kicked in, we knew that violence would not work because we looked at history. And when Hitler tried it with violence and with his putsch, they arrested him. He went to prison. And we thought, well, obviously this didn't work. But elections did work, literally. And this is what we tried. And we took it to the streets. And it was the non-parliamentary opposition, how we call it. We take it to the streets, and there were many things we could go against. For example, talking about grandparents again. We claimed there was a long debate in Germany talking about the regular Wehrmacht, how many atrocities they were involved in, and how much actually the SS did. And of course, many people's grandparents or parents were in the Wehrmacht, and nobody wanted their grandparents or parents be criminals. And there was a big wandering exhibit that went to different cities and that actually pictures of crimes of the Wehrmacht and proof that the regular Wehrmacht was involved. Not everybody, but a lot of them. So, and
you saw that. What was your reaction, and what was the reaction of the others?
These are just single incidents, and it's taken out of proportion. And of course, the Jews are somehow involved. And we took it to the streets, and it was the mid-90s. And it ended with the biggest rally we had was in Munich with 7,000 people. 7,000 neo-Nazis marching in Munich, demonstrating, rallying against this exhibit, chanting, our grandparents were no criminals, literally.
That was 7,000 people in the 90s. Where are they in 2022?
Say it again, please.
Where are they in 2022, those 7,000 people? And do you think, are they holding that same ideology today?
There's many people that hold the ideology. It has shifted, of course. There's a party in Germany nowadays, the AfD. They claim to be not as radical, but they're far-right extremists, and they just got, before COVID, over 20% in Saxony, where we have to ask ourselves, where's this coming from?
And were these topics taught in school, or is this a completely outside of school type of thing? And if so, what does this education look like even in Germany today, where you grew up?
No, I think the schools have done a good job. That hasn't always been like that. After 1945, and again, my mom was born in 1945, and she told me about history class, how it looked for her. And they learned, yes, the Holocaust happened, 6 million Jews got murdered, and that...
You heard that from your mom growing up, but still couldn't believe it.
Well, when I was a child or whatever, it was what she was taught, and I believed it too. When we were taught in school, I believed it first. I knew the Nazis were the bad guys. I believed the Holocaust happened. Otherwise, all these jokes, these anti-Semitic jokes, wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have worked. And I think it's a bad timing to present. We have the same problem here in the U.S. that civil rights, it was slavery too, but Holocaust education starts at an age when especially young boys start to discover their masculinity and are looking for something presented to them that they can use, and that's exactly what happened. And I think it's a very bad time. It should happen before and much better. There's not enough Holocaust education. But Germany has done a great job. In the meantime, building up from that, it was just a big problem after 1945. What do you do with all these people that were not hung in Nuremberg, that were not going to, like Werner von Braun, becoming NASA director or whatever? The Germans that were left in Germany, you couldn't just kill them or whatever. And how do you, they call it denazification, how do you re-educate them, especially those who were maybe in the Hitler Youth? And you technically can't. It's hard, so they just waited until they died and started teaching the next generation. And it worked. There was unfortunately not much money, so I went never to a concentration camp at the time because they had no money. But now they do, and I think they do fantastic work now. So
you said that you had actually never met a Jew, but a lot of the hate was towards the Jew, even though perhaps some of the physical violence was against Turkish on the street. In your mind, what was a Jew, and when was the first time that you met a Jew?
In my mind, that shifted from time to time. The first impression of a Jew was a picture I saw in an elementary school, and that was a couple praying Jews with a black hat and locks at the Temple Wall in Jerusalem. And this is what I thought all Jews looked like. And we learned literally Shalom Alachem and learned the couple first lines. And okay, Jews eat gefilte fish. And that's what I thought. Then, as a neo-Nazi in the neo-Nazi party, of course, the dehumanizing started with caricatures, with stories, with comparing them to rats infesting and whatsoever. But at the time, again, they were the same box as all the other enemies we had. That changed in about 1998. I call it the advent of the internet. That changed a lot of things. Number one, you can get in touch with people worldwide. And first I thought it's just like the German problem. Germany is under attack. We have to save the German race, the German nation. They told me from all the other countries, we have the same problem. But there's a bigger enemy who's causing this problem. And they told me to look it up. And that was the second thing that changed with the internet. You have to understand, Germany does a really good job putting its finger on the problem. You go to prison if you deny the Holocaust, if you spread this propaganda. The internet changed that. One mouse click, you had it. And they told me, read this one book, it will explain everything. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And I don't know who has heard of it and who not. 1905 invented in Russia what you call today fake news to discredit Jews and by anti-Semites and by anti-Zionists. And we know Henry Ford took it here, put it in every Ford Model T. Hitler then took it. And I read it. And all of a sudden, the Jew was not anymore on the same level as all the other enemies. No, it was up here. And it felt like, I would say, I found like the Holy Grail. It was like, oh wow, this is why Hitler hated the Jews. World domination, and the white race we could be the only ones standing between the Jews and world domination. We could save everybody. And imagine you feel like you can be a superhero saving your own people. And
so when do you meet
a cape.
And when do you meet your first Jew in person, face to face, and how does that go?
I have never met any Jewish person until I moved to the US, which was much later. I mean, I left that movement in 2002, 2003 and moved to the US in 2012. And the first Jewish people I met, we never talked about being Jewish, not being Jewish, or my past. It never came up, so I never thought anything about it. That happened a little bit later.
And so let's go back into leaving a movement. Is there a break point that you said, I don't believe it? Or is it a gradual path towards seeing facts in person, hearing stories? When do you realize, okay, I'm in, but now I'm heading out?
If that would be the one point where I woke up in the morning and thought, this is all wrong, and I would tell you that, I would lie. Because if you walk 10 miles into this forest of hate, guess what? You have to walk out 10 miles. So, and that doesn't happen overnight. So what happened, I told you Germany does a great job and has done a great job putting its finger on the problem. So they watched us. And one day they just tried to destroy the whole organization that I led. They had an eye on us. We had police officers. And
what was the goal of that organization, by the way? You said there were about 25
it was, in that
leaders.
case, the KKK. I had joined the KKK and took over an organization, became the German leader of the organization, and even the European leader. We had chapters in Ireland, in France, in Flanders, in Sweden, and Germany.
And just as Mina said, in terms of BDS on the campus, did you have a mission to, we're going to go to European campuses and spread this hate? Or was it just sort of who you found on the internet? How did that actually work?
The first internet, of course, was very important to recruit people. And then we sorted out. We didn't want the regular Nazis because we knew we can't win. I tried it for 10 years. It didn't work out. I knew we have to go into society, regular people, infiltrate society and get the members from there, looking at actually KKK, how it operated in the US in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, having governors like in Indiana. If you wanted to do anything in Indiana in 1930, you couldn't get around the KKK. That's how powerful they were. And also, again,
is that the same KKK in the 30s in Indiana as the one in Germany, or you were explaining it's a little different?
Well, we had a conversation earlier.
Yeah.
You have that KKK doesn't exist anymore. Since the 1940s. And the reason for that is they couldn't pay the IRS debt. So they just disbanded. And of course, nobody wanted to pick up the bill. And ever since, they have all these prefixes like the White Knights, the Loyal Knights, the Secret Knights, the whatever Knights, and whatever they call themselves. And everybody claims we are the original. And you have dozens of splinter groups. And there were 5 or 6 splinter groups in Germany, and I was the leader of one of them.
And so today here, though, is there a unification of hate, or is it lone wolf and it's sort of like whack-a-mole trying to find them?
The hate is spread by many organizations. There's no unification. It was tried by the alt-right. We have seen it in Charlottesville. Mm-hmm. This was a big try to, they call it Unite the Right, literally. And the second march, that was much smaller, fortunately, Unite the Right too. But it didn't work out. I call it always, they work together when they find the smallest common denominator. Mm-hmm. And the best example for that is actually January 6th. And many people don't know that. There was an incident that you had one person storming the Capitol wearing a T-shirt glorifying the Holocaust. Yeah. And there was an Orthodox Jew from New York in the crowd also storming the Capitol. You're like, how can this happen? And that was the smallest common denominator. And I call them unholy alliances. When today you're my friend and we deal with you tomorrow. So that was ultranationalism and, of course, then the political idea.
So take us 5 miles out of the forest. And what did that journey look like?
Well, for me, we have to talk about, I was still 100% in the forest in the year 2003. What happened to me was the police knocked at the door and threatened us to put us in prison. And I said, we're not doing anything illegal. But they told me also, if one of your members is doing something illegal, commits a violent crime, it's my head that's on the plate. And first I was like, no, I've got my members under control. But we were not the hippies preaching peace and love. I had to tell my members not to commit violent crimes. And that was my actually excuse or proof that we're not violent. But if I have to tell them not to, there's something wrong with the message, right? But I didn't see it like that. After a while, I was like, oh, wait a minute. But the main reason was I was scared of prison. I had 3 kids at the time, and I was like, if I go to prison, I'm not good to my kids. If I go to prison, I'm not any good to what I'm believing in. And I thought and still believe that prison is a very scary place. So, and everybody, they visited all members, and everybody knew what was going on. So it was easy to pick up the phone and tell them, hey, this is too hot. I'm stepping down. I'm gone. I even appointed a successor. That's how much responsible I felt. Because leaving a hate group doesn't make you become an anti-racist or activist against anti-Semitism. I was still a full-blown anti-Semite, full-blown Islamophobe, full-blown hater. It changed when we had to move, because a couple months later I decided to move away from this town, because the core group was in this town. And I was like, they still could tie me to that group if something happens. And we picked a little town that was far away enough where I knew that there's no major Nazis in the town. And I remember calling the phone number and the classifieds, the only apartment that we could find within like 2 weeks because the lease was over. And it was a Turkish immigrant who picked up the phone. I was like, are you kidding me? The only apartment available owned by a Muslim immigrant. And there was this, I had no choice. I had to move in because we were all of a sudden on Section 8 housing and welfare because we lived in a bubble. In this movement, you are actually isolating yourself so much, you're only listening to your own hate music. You start boycotting. And of course, you don't watch Hollywood movies anymore. Steven Spielberg, well, he's a Jew. We don't watch that. We didn't buy certain products anymore because the companies were owned by Jews, multinational Jewish companies. We don't buy this anymore. Doctors, many doctors, don't go to a doctor, they implant a chip or whatever. I was paranoid. I was waking up literally with the fear that the police is coming with a search warrant, or that the race war begins, or the Jews start taking over the world or something. And that's the feeling that I took to bed. It was absolute fear and paranoia. It was not a good living.
And so you get out and you meet somebody who's Jewish, you come to this country, and what is now, you're out, but now there are many that are still in. Maybe you can share this story, and we're going to see one more clip in just a minute after you share this story, of a story of re-education and the mezuzah story.
Important for the whole thing is to understand what actually changed my mind. Because again,
yes,
just leaving the hate group doesn't make you become an anti-racist. So my landlord lived in the same house. He lived downstairs, we lived upstairs, and I didn't want to have anything to do with him, of course. Look, 1 year after 9/11, I thought all Muslims are like Osama bin Laden, and I knew I can unmask him one day and prove that he's an ugly Muslim terrorist and that he's a bad guy. Well, the thing was, again, we were broke, Section 8 housing and so on, and when he asked me what I did for a living, I didn't tell him that I was a Grand Dragon of the KKK, of course, and that I sold merchandise. I told him the other part, that I really did IT and built computers for the members. And he had a computer that kept breaking, and he offered me money to repair it. He had a teenage son, who knows what he did. And it was a job. I was sitting in his living room, but I saw it as a job. You know, in that movement, you lie a lot to yourself. Like you meet the nice black person, nice immigrant. You know, that's your token black person. All the others are bad. And that was a little bit like this. Took the money, went upstairs and so on. And one time it took longer and took Turkish tea and pancakes there because he thought TM might be hungry. And first I was like, I'm not touching this. He touched it with his dirty Turkish fingers. And maybe I put blood in the pancakes. He wants to poison me because I really was convinced he will stab me in my bed at some point. On the other hand, I also knew that in that culture, they might be horribly offended if you reject the offer of food. and I did something very selfish. And I did eat it and drank the tea because I didn't want to test how much he would be offended. And it was really good. From the time on, of course, the computer kept breaking. Every time I went downstairs, he already had the tea and the pancakes. And at some point, it went further, and he asked me if I want to come for dinner. And, in his kitchen. And this is something where you actually only invite family and friends into your kitchen for dinner. I didn't feel like it was family and friends. I was still in warrior mode. Hey, all Muslims are, And stay away with I felt like he's too nice. I felt like he's just pretending. But I said yes. And I remember sitting there. I remember where we sat and everything. And I was asked the audience, who likes fish soup? Hands up. Okay, that's usually, 2-3 hands. It's always the same reaction. The rest of you guys can feel my pain because the appetizer was fish soup. And that was my pancake situation because I had really to tell him it doesn't go down there. And I was like, it was like a time bomb, like tick, tick, tick. I was like, but actually this is the time when I can prove he will turn into a nasty Muslim terrorist, whatever, when I tell him. He will be so offended. And I was like, Hibbert, I don't like fish soup. And guess what happened? Nothing. His wife came, got the fish soup and brought chicken and fries. Because I was sitting there, he's probably serving couscous and falafel or whatever. It's not even Turkish. But no, it was chicken and fries. And I thought, this is so normal. And then it dawned on me too, hold on, wait a minute. Who am I to decide what's normal for him? Just because it's normal for me. It was like he looks different, he talks different dialect or different accent, he prays different, and so on. We have nothing in common, right? How? It's obvious. And then you have these commonalities, and then I thought, it's not just the chicken and fries. Over the last 6 months, he has told me actually how much he worries about his kids, about his future. I was like, that's just like I worry about my kid's future, about his future. That he likes good music and a good movie and good food and so on, the commonalities. And at the end, I just saw that man who's trying to make it, and the hate was crumbled. It was just there. I was like, there was nothing left to hate.
Did he ever know your story?
No, actually not. I tried to get in touch with him on Facebook a couple of years ago, and
not yet.
I don't know if he has seen it or not.
Franz Rosenzweig always says, not yet. So
I wish I could tell him how important it was because my hate was completely crumbled. And I was like, okay, I have to make a decision. Am I putting that hate together to the loaf of hatred that I used to nurture, or I'm not going to analyze it? I thought, no, I need to analyze it. There's something wrong here.
So I want to share this video and then share some stories of re-education that you've seen of success and how we not just change hate.
What happened to me was I was put in the box, Nazi. I didn't feel like one.
Yeah.
So the reasons why I told Holocaust jokes was not because I felt like an anti-Semite. So it was unintentional anti-Semitism. It was still anti-Semitism, but unintentional at the time. My intention, why I told them, was a different one.
Right.
And for the person we don't know, the person who puts a swastika there, what the intention was. And if we write Nazi on that box and put them in there, there's two options what we can do. You and me can pull them out of the box and save that soul, or leave them in there, and the guys with the swastikas are pulling them out. What I would want to do.
So how have you seen literal, real examples of pulling people out of that box? And then I want to ask to our middle school students, what's your message to them? And then we'll open it up to Q&A as well.
If I can share two stories to round this up, because you asked before when I met my first Jew, and that was actually in 2018 here in LA, the Museum of Tolerance, and I started working with campuses, and I went start telling my story, mainly to Jewish kids, and with AEPI and Hillel and Stand With Us and other organizations. And realized, well, these are just people. So I was intrigued by that and attracted by all this. And I wanted to know about Yom Kippur. Really important to me that I know the highest holiday. What is it about?
No fish soup on Yom Kippur.
Say it again?
No fish soup on Yom Kippur.
No.
Yeah, just...
And yeah, I was also taught, because I thought all Jews eat gefilte fish. Well, and this was debunked because my first meeting with Jews was actually AEPI brothers. and they were all kids. Like, one was black, and I was like, how does this work? Of course, I explained it. One had red hair, and I was looking like, who's looking Jewish? I caught myself. Even though I was already lecturing, but I caught myself because I just didn't have any reference, but I knew it was wrong. And I just realized that just as diverse as any other community. And guess what? They also like chicken and fries, some kosher. But anyway, so Yom Kippur, I wanted to get to know that because I already was introduced to one Hanukkah. I was introduced to a Hillel director's house for Pesach. I was like, I need to know. And coincidentally, I got in touch with a rabbi in Memphis, where we live in the metro area. And I went there, was welcome. They knew who I was. And after the service, somebody walks up, asks about anti-Semitism in Germany. And again, I told you all how proud I am that Germany has done a great job making up for it, and it must never happen again. I was like, I don't think you have to be afraid of Germans anymore. And I went home. You know, it was a great night. I wore a kippah, got a transliteration to pray, and it was great. The next day, I watched the news, and I saw that a German neo-Nazi had attacked the synagogue in Halle, Germany. And I felt like a liar. I was like, what did I tell these people last night? But something else really crawled up my back, a really bad feeling. I was like, wait a minute. I was sitting in there. I looked like a Jew. I prayed like a Jew. If somebody would have entered that synagogue just to hurt the people inside and murder them just because they were Jewish, guess what? I would have been dead. And for the very first time, I knew how it feels not to feel safe just because you're a member of a minority group, in that case, the Jewish community. The problem I had was I kept going to campuses, and all of a sudden I didn't have an answer anymore because I felt just as numb and helpless as the people in the community. And I was like, for a couple of months, really lost in my mission until I went just before COVID in Chicago, and it was a Chabad rabbi led a little group that I was speaking to, and he asked me if he can share a little story. And that's the last story I'm sharing with you before we turn over, and that also explains the solution. It was a little bit already told in the little clip, but here you said practical, real stories, something that really happened. Just before COVID, a young female student at the Michigan State University just moved in campus and put up a mezuzah. And it was a time when all the attacks happened by the Black Hebrew Israelites in New Jersey. It was all over the news, and the mezuzah was stolen. And she was really afraid first because she didn't know how intentional it was. Was it against her? Was it anti-Semitic? She didn't know. Fortunately, there were cameras, and they could identify the person who did it. It was a kid on campus, a student. And they asked her what she wants to do, if she wants to press charges, because, everybody had put that young man in the box already. Looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, must be a Nazi, did something anti-Semitic, right? Easy. Close the box, put him on the shelf. She said, no. They were like, what do you want to do? She said, I want to talk to him. I want to know why he did it. And that's what she did. So they sat together, they sat down, and he realized in the conversation the whole extent of his doing. He apologized, gave her the money for a new mezuzah, and agreed to take a tour in the Holocaust Museum. So what you can see in that one, and this is often short moments we have where these people are vulnerable when they're in that box or when they're just put in this box. And we have two things we can do. And as I said in the clip, we can put that box with a label on the shelf, let it breathe, and wait until the guys with the hoods and the swastikas to pull them out because they're happy about that box. They're just waiting for it. Or do what the young woman did. Open the box and see the human being inside. That we don't love or like anymore because did something anti-Semitic. Pull him out, put him back on track. And she maybe has saved that young man from becoming the next synagogue shooter. And I told the rabbi, I don't need to talk. I don't need to speak anymore. That's what I wanted to say. And this is what we have to do.
And so why Judaism for you now? You could be anything and speak to Jewish audiences, but why do you now see yourself as part of the Jewish people? And what is that message to our middle schoolers here tonight?
Well, after that night at Yom Kippur, it was actually Erev Yom Kippur when I attended that synagogue, a small conservative synagogue. There's two in Memphis, and it's the smaller one. I felt really interested in these people and kept going. Erez Shabbat and Kabbalat Shabbat, and I liked it, and it was nice dinner.
Tell everybody here they can keep coming back too.
Say it again.
I'm just kidding.
and kept going, and of course COVID happened, and then I attended on Zoom, and I felt like also being in touch with all these Jewish students all across the country and all the organizations I worked with, and all this direct access as well. I felt this weird attraction to the Jewish community itself. And then I also felt the Jewish ethics lined up 100% with my newfound ethics. And even though I was baptized Catholic, I was never really a religious person per se. I never was a Jesus person, so I never believed in that. And what happens if you take Jesus and those 2,000 years out of Christianity, what's left? And so if you put these three things together, then you've got Judaism. And at some point I decided to convert. And I'm in the process to converting to Judaism right now.
So we want to open it up to questions from our, I don't like to say audience, but our Sinai family here. And yeah.
Thank you for coming. I think it's really brave that you share your story and, you know, how it happened and how you became who you were and, you know, and how you were rehabilitated. It sounds like mostly by your own will, to be honest. So, how were your children affected by this? And did you teach your children your old ways? And then did you help them find their new ways? How did that happen with your family? Because it's kind of like the same. I kind of find the parallel between you not wanting to villainize your grandparents. How did your children reconcile who you are and who you are now, who you were?
Back in, I call it, in my other life, my three children, my oldest son was almost 10. And one at the time, he was 7 or 8. And I decided, by the way, not to teach it to my children, because I knew if you push something too hard on your children, what will they do? They will rebel against it and do the opposite. And I was afraid that they become communists or something. So I thought, no, I'm not doing this. And when I was the leader of the clan, of course, my son picked that kid around the corner that lived there, and he was a mixed kid. So he was half black, and chose that would be his best friend. And the father is the grand dragon of the clan. And that led, of course, to many, many weird situations. And I remember once we had a big window in the living room full of clansmen, and my son comes down with a bicycle, and the black kid comes behind him with a bicycle, and all clans people like, what is that? What is it? Wait. I'm not teaching him anything. He will realize what's going on. The black kid will steal his bike. He will start lying. He will just realize how bad these people are. I don't have to do anything. Oh, you're smart. And I was like, phew. But the thing is, my son was smarter than I. He never picked up that ideology. He never joined that, neither did my other two kids. Fortunately. Now, the second question, how do they think about it now? And that is really tricky. My son is now 27, has 2 kids. I'm a grandfather. And we talk almost daily, but we do not talk much about my past. We reconnected in 2016, and we talked about it one time. And even though I'm still on the news or on TV in programs, and it is there, and he sees it, he says, oh, cool, but he doesn't. It is, I don't know if it's shame for who I was. I don't know. It must be hard. He doesn't really want to talk about it. But he lives overseas, and we talk through WhatsApp and
I have a question. your journey to United States. Why?
Oh, that was a childhood dream. You know, the land of endless opportunities and cowboys and Indians, Hollywood movies, and of course the rich uncle in America, right? And I indeed had an aunt in America who emigrated in 1956 or whatever, and then moved to San Diego, and they visited us in the 80s, and that was, yeah, and I knew it was just a dream to come here and die here. I knew it, and it was a good time actually. In 2012, my past had a little bit to do with it. I almost emigrated in 2011, didn't work out, and in 2012 something happened because I didn't talk about my past for 10 years. And the reason for that was fear of rejection. You have to realize the USA, America, loves redemption. And I realized that when my story came out here in the US, that was easy. When it came out in Germany, and I knew Germany likes redemption too, but not when it comes to Nazis, for a good reason. And they doubt it. If somebody gets out of the movement there, it's highly doubted if they're rehabilitated. There's professional organizations like Exit Germany that I'm still working with, and I'm an ambassador for that organization now and help them. And I have my own program now where I help people leave extremist environments and hate groups. And I help them because I didn't have any help, and it was hard.
Thank you again for all that you're doing. I think it's brave, and you're a wonderful speaker. I was introduced to an author by the name of Tuvia Tenenbaum, and he talked about visiting Club 88 in Germany. Can you tell me if they still exist or if you know of them?
Say it one more time.
Club 88.
Oh, Club 88. Doesn't exist anymore, fortunately. And interestingly, Club 88 was in northern Germany, in the state of Schleswig-Holstein, a music club for neo-Nazis where they had concerts every weekend. It opened after I left that movement, but I knew about it because at some point in 2006, I moved to northern Germany for a couple of years, and I lived 4 miles, if at all, 3-4 miles from the club away. Unfortunately, nobody knew about that I lived there, and I was out of the movement. But it actually has played a role in my story too, because when I was outed by the media in 2012, really brutally, I had no control over my coming out. And that was not really good. All of a sudden, also these people in Club 88 that you were talking about. Oh, HH 88 is a code in the neo-Nazi movement. It's the 8th letter of the alphabet times 2. It's Heil Hitler. And they use that in combination sometimes with 14 and 88, which stands for "We must secure the existence of our people and the future for white children," which was coined in the 1980s. And it's often like you sign letters with it or tattoos very often. And Germans use that too. You cannot say Heil Hitler in Germany because you go to prison. I mean, you can say it in education, but you couldn't put it on a T-shirt. But as a number code, you could at that time. Now it's forbidden too. Germany is really trying hard to go after them, but it's not easy because they come up with new things to hide the extremism or how to recruit people. And fortunately, they closed the club at some point, fortunately, but it was there almost over 10 years, for a long time. I'm surprised to know about that.
Okay, I just want to reiterate what everyone else already said, that what you do is incredible. As you spoke about tonight, also as my mom spoke about, education is so important, and just exposure to different people's stories. I'm sure everyone knows unlearning is so much more difficult than learning, and you spoke about your years of having this truth. When you were unlearning and kind of peeling those layers back, how did you find stability in finding the truth and that path?
That's a very good question. And in my case, I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have a teacher, because when I got out of this movement, it was 2002, and there was not many organizations. There were not many leading members at the time that got out of that movement. It's almost like a trend in the late 90s, 2000s, more and more leaders of that movement had this epiphany that they woke up and got out, and organizations formed. Like I said, Exit Germany. We have groups here in the US like Life After Hate or other groups that I know and sometimes work with, and have my own exit program as well, my nonprofit organization Change, that helps with this process, because I didn't have it. For 10 years, I didn't take care of these layers, as you said it. I just was like, okay, I realize it. No, it's not all immigrants are bad. I know, okay, the Nazis were the bad guys. And I was like, looking at it, okay, I realized the Holocaust happened. And the real interesting part is I never went to a concentration camp. In school, not because there was no money for it. In the movement, I was a Holocaust denier, and I felt like, oh, they just built it to make us believe it happened. And when I got out, and again, I didn't have time, or I didn't have the tools to unlayer this again. I just accepted it, and I was like, I don't need to go there. Nobody has to prove it to me anymore. But that led to the problem that I never reflected on the former anti-Semitism. There was no Jews I could meet, and there was no organization. Fortunately, that has changed, and because that was so hard for me, and it took me like 16, 17 years to get to the point where I could connect to the Jewish community and take care of these layers. Of course, I wasn't an anti-Semite anymore, but again, I caught myself looking, who's looking Jewish? Oh, all Jews eat gefilte fish and all these things, you know. The stereotypes were there. Again, I had nobody helping me with these layers, but now there's organizations, and I do that as well. So I offer that for people who getting out of these environments, I get them together with minority groups, with the Black community, with the Jewish community. And I can give you one more example, because real life examples are really important. One example, Jeff Scoop, he was the leader of the Nazi Party here in the US for 25 years, the National Socialist Movement. They were in Charlottesville and everything, and he left the movement after Charlottesville. And for him, it was also the last thing was the anti-Semitism he struggled with. And he admitted that. And I got in touch with him, and I knew him from 2002. Of course, we lost touch when I was out. But I took him to a synagogue actually in Skokie in Chicago, and made the first introduction to the Jewish community. And he was just so, he couldn't believe it, how welcoming the Jewish community was. You know, the people he and I vilified the most. And that was amazing for me too. That absolute warm welcome. And
hi. I was just wondering, I've noticed a lot recently, particularly at my school, people are very quick to jumping to labeling people as anti-Semites. And what made me think of this was when you're talking about how people labeled you at school as the Nazi kid, and that was what started to kind of lead you down a path of being more confident with telling Holocaust jokes. I understand that people want to make it clear, like if a teacher says something that is anti-Israel or anti-Jew, people can say that teacher said this, but to quickly call them, oh, that's a teacher that's unsafe for a Jewish student to have, or that's an anti-Semitic teacher. Do you think that does harm, or do you think there's a way to express that a teacher or a student might have a bias without putting them in that box?
it's extremely difficult because, and I said before, looks like a duck, walks like a duck, so must be a duck. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it can be very unintentional. A very good example, not even in schools, is what happened with Whoopi Goldberg just a couple of months ago. Or was it last year? It was just very recent. She has done a lot for the Jewish community, and it was rather unintentional, but it was not smart what she did, and she could have known better. And a lot of people just have a lack of Holocaust education, or in general education, and even teachers. And then you have these comments that are not wise, they are not smart, and they are anti-Semitic, but often very unintentional. And we have that problem that we tend to put people in those boxes. And these people start even radicalizing more. I rather would say, pull these people out of boxes, including the teachers, and send them to a museum. Have some Holocaust education. and see, because, and I talked about these 10 miles that go into the forest of hate. And that's like the stages of radicalization. When people get in, I usually have a picture where it shows like dots. A white dot that gets darker and darker, and at the end is a red dot, which is a hate crime. When people are in that box, including the teacher, we don't know where they are. They could be a full-blown anti-Semite and some member of some organization, or it could be just a white dot where we don't know, and it was very unintentional. If we don't look at it, we won't know. And this is why it's important.
Thank you also. Did you face threats or other repercussions from neo-Nazis when you exited?
From one or two members of the group after a while, because I didn't come back and it was kind of obvious. But first, not because it was unique, because we all were threatened and they could understand why I left. But it is often safer to leave hate groups than most people think it is. Because it's not that you send in your two-week notice to the Klan. It's more that you decide you don't go there anymore, and they pick up the phone. Hey, why didn't you come to the last meeting? What is going on? And then you have stuff, I don't know, family, this and that. I have stuff to do. And they leave you alone. They will call again, and after a while they will give up. Fortunately, the gross amount of members, there's a high fluctuation in this movement. People join because they think they can, like I thought, defend my people, or they often trick you in. It's not about hate, it's the love of our own people, and so on. And it's easier for people to join if you think you do something good, and then you see the whole what it really is about when the hate comes up in these groups. And let's say 80% of the people that join these groups leave again after a year or two, when they really have experienced everything what's going on. And therefore, the leaders don't even have the time to chase all of them. They're rather interested to recruit new people that they can form where it doesn't happen. So it's relatively safe. And so I didn't have many threats. Another reason is also when I go out there, I don't need to tell how bad the KKK is, because we all know that. And I also tell people when they leave, don't snitch on them, because you don't need to give, if you were a witness of a crime, you need to tell it. But you don't need to give a membership list to the CIA or the FBI, because they already know everybody who's inside there. They watch them really, really good. So don't put a target on yourself. And then it's rather safe. The only time when it's really, really dangerous is in prison gang environments, because it's less ideology there. It's more mafia structures. It has to do with drugs and money, and they don't want to lose their money structure there. That's a different, but it's really dangerous there.
So I think we'll close this evening with what can we do? We can hear your story and we can tell your story, but what can we do as a school, as a synagogue, as a Los Angeles Jewish community, as a Stand With Us community? What do we do when hate hits our door 2 weeks ago? And do we use our words, our actions?
Two things. I'm asked, what's the solution? I say compassion, unconditional love, and humanization. Because this is how the Nazis were able to convince a whole population to either participate in a genocide or look away. Because they were able to dehumanize the other, a big part of the population that were once neighbors or friends, and all of a sudden they turned them into the Gestapo. And it happens quick. And if I may tell one more story, and I made an experiment how quick it goes with dehumanization, how quick we are ready to turn against the other when we take the human being away. This year at a yeshiva in Memphis, I made a little experiment. 8th graders, and I asked who likes cauliflower. It's a little bit like the fish soup question. So two kids, and one of them AJ, and I said, AJ, what would you think about if the other kids would start calling you cauliflower head? I said, I wouldn't like it. And his seating neighbor, apparently a friend of his, he took the chance and started chanting cauliflower head and started pushing him around. And I asked his friend, it's fun pushing the cauliflower head around, huh? I said, yeah, but you wouldn't like to hurt your friend AJ, right? I said, no. So what happened there, within a second, I gave them the opportunity to dehumanize somebody, And that one kid even became physical in front of the rabbi, in front of the principal, in front of me within a second. And this is how quick it goes to dehumanize somebody. They become physical. And this is what we have to be aware of before we use any mock names, even harmless mock names like cauliflower head. And they got worse. We see it nowadays. Trumpsters, libtards, racist, baby killers. In a political environment or against ethnic groups, like the Nazis did. The Jews are like rats infesting the country. And all of a sudden you don't see that human being anymore. You start pushing them. You start turning them into the Gestapo. And 1 second is enough sometimes.
So I want to conclude with the words of our tradition of our rabbis, which I think you now have lived and taught us this evening. Ohev shalom v'rodev shalom v'ohev et habriot. Seek peace, pursue peace, and love humanity. T.M. Garret, we want to thank you.
Thank you.
For your courage, for your wisdom, for your inspiration. We want to thank Roz Rothstein, Aaron Alkabetz, Mina Rush, and Stand With Us for partnering with Sinai Temple this evening. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you so much.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.